Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to talk about Chad Daybell again. Okay, but this time I'd like to try to see things through the lens that we're using to look at Rex Heuermann, because I think there's a lot of similarities here. And I think this is going to reveal a lot about people who commit crimes or people that can be, let's say, sort of almost acting like psychopathically. This can sort of help give us a little bit of insight into how a person who really otherwise seems like they're just not criminal in any way. Okay, how people that seem very vanilla, very boring, very harmless, okay, how they can maybe occasionally end up committing very serious crimes. Now, obviously, I don't think that everybody who's quiet and everybody who looks innocent. I'm not trying to say that everybody who looks boring and innocent has like this dangerous dark side. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that I think these people have a lot to show us. Okay, about how no matter what your presentation, no matter how boring you seem, no matter how vanilla, how harmless you seem, okay, it really shows us and teaches us the danger of maybe not having deep in your heart, okay, sort of like the ability and the belief that people should carry and take on a lot of discomfort and burden. Okay. Now, why would I be talking about discomfort and burden? I mean, how can you? I can't look at Chad Daybell. I can't look at Rex Heuermann and say that they can't take on pains and burdens. But if you really look at how they unfolded, the way their behaviors unfolded, and the way their lives unfolded, you can at some point see that at some point they don't show the signs of a person who could take on the burden and the discomforts of life. Okay, so basically this relates to narcissism, because I propose sort of like a narcissistic stage of development. Okay, and I'm not talking about the traditional narcissistic stage of development. In psychoanalysis, they say that the narcissistic stage of development is where, let's say, a person at age 2 or age 1, 2, or 3 or whatever starts to distinguish that they are different from other people, that they are a different person. It's sort of like when you start to realize that I am a separate person. Okay, well, I'd like to kind of modify that a little bit. And the suggestion that I have is that the narcissistic stage of development should be maybe between age 4, 5, 6, up to even late adolescence, maybe as far as like age 21. And basically, it's two things, in my opinion. It is, number one, the belief. It's the belief that we have. Like, what what is my belief as to how much pain or how much discomfort that I should be taking on as a baseline, okay, in my life? All right. I think everybody sort of has a belief, like what's an acceptable level of irritation, burden, discomfort, and how much should we take on? Okay. Because whenever we engage with the world, we sort of take on the burden of it. Okay. And I think each of us has sort of like a belief, like what is an acceptable loading? How loaded should we be with burdens, discomforts? Because here's the thing: even if we're like accustomed to taking on a lot of burden, like say I could grow up on a farm and I could have to do a lot of chores, and maybe like my daily responsibilities, I have to get up really early, I have to do a lot of things, so I might be conditioned to take on a lot of burden, and I might be conditioned to really engage and take on a lot of responsibilities. But if privately, I don't believe a person should take that on. Okay, eventually I'm gonna get to some pattern in life where at least I'm at risk that I want to escape it. You see what I mean? So it's not just how much difficulty and burden, and it's not just how much discomfort that we can take on, but it is also what is our belief about what a person should take on. Okay, so it's sort of two things working together. And I think in the narcissistic phases of our development, I think we sort of develop sort of two things. We develop sort of a belief about how much discomfort a person should take on and maintain as a baseline. Okay, so it's like a belief. Okay, and then how much do we actually condition ourselves to take on? Because you can't just take on discomforts and burden in life. You cannot. It's how much you're conditioned to take on. Because it's at that level, psychologically, we're almost talking about like a sport. It's almost like an athletic and endurance kind of thing, where you have to actually condition yourself to take on a certain amount, because your body has to literally be conditioned. Okay. And so I think a lot of people underestimate, and I think a lot of people unconsciously, they don't even realize how much they take on in life, how much responsibility, how much discomfort, how much holding like dissonances, things that aren't incompatible, how much we really hold, in our psychology. I think sometimes we don't even realize how loaded down we are with just the environmental considerations, like political things in the family, conflicts in the family, with friends, at the workplace. I mean, we carry a lot of stuff, and sometimes we don't even realize it. Okay. But I think we can't assume that every single person in the world has actually conditioned themselves to carry a lot of burden, a lot of dissonances, a lot of discomforts. Okay, we can't assume. There may be people who look like they're normal in life. They have a job, they have a family, but they may psychologically kind of put off all those things, or not really take them on in their psychology, so that not everybody is carrying a lot of discomfort and burden. Okay, even though they may live in a situation, there's plenty to be concerned about, but not everybody really takes it on. Okay, so but some people do. Okay, but then there's that other part, which is our personal belief as to how much a person should take on as a baseline. Okay, so I propose that in the narcissistic stage of development, it may be like, say, from age 4 all the way to age 21, everybody's developing sort of in parallel, sort of a belief as to how much a person should take on as far as discomfort in life. Okay. And then what's our actual level of conditioning, our sports conditioning, how much we are athletically conditioned to actually take on the strain. It's like a strain of having a lot of burdens and discomforts, psychological, and just taking on a lot of considerations and sort of loading ourselves with a lot of concerns, worries, considerations, how much we're actually we're conditioned to take on. So it's like belief and conditioning. Okay. And so my theory is that a person sort of gets into the narcissistic zone, okay, when they have a combination of, let's say, a belief. I have neighbors, these dogs here. It is really, where I live, my neighbors, I apologize. The dogs are just out of control. Anyway, so my belief is that a person gets into the narcissistic zone. Okay. Basically, you're sort of in the neighborhood of narcissism when you have a combination of a belief, okay, a belief that a person should not really have to carry a lot of burden as a baseline, or you may have a belief that a person could carry a lot, but that a person shouldn't have to carry. In other words, it's like sort of like a private belief that a person shouldn't really have to carry a lot of discomfort. Okay, so it's that belief combined with a lack of conditioning to even carry a lot of discomfort. Okay, so that even if you're able to carry it for, like, say, you might be able to carry burdens for a couple of weeks or a couple of days, but eventually you can't really endure it for the whole marathon of life. So it's like you're not really conditioned to carry like long-term discomforts or even pain. You know what I mean? So it's like pain tolerance and discomfort tolerance, so that you're sort of a likely candidate to, even if you can carry a certain amount of burden and discomfort, you're a likely candidate to want to escape it. Okay. So I think, to me, it's a combination of belief and what we're actually conditioned to carry in life. Okay. So to me, that's kind of like the basic narcissistic profile. All right. And when people are like that, they're very easily falling into patterns, mental patterns, where they're kind of not really taking on all the taxation of their environment. Okay. And they kind of carve out for themselves sort of a special filtered reality. Okay. Where they can't even process aspects of themselves. Okay. That could cause dissonance and discomfort. Okay. So, in other words, part of my environment is even parts of myself. Okay. So let's say if I have sort of like a baseline personality where I'm just kind of a boring, ordinary guy, just a person who just has limited interests, and I like to do my, whatever, I have my hobbies, and I just have a very vanilla life. But then at the same time, I have like a sexuality. Let's say I have a really intense sexuality, really intense sexual fantasies, and that doesn't seem to fit with the rest of my personality. Okay. Well, it's almost like that part of me is so uncomfortable because it just doesn't fit with the rest of me, that even for me, it's uncomfortable to have to deal with that. So that's almost like a part of my environment. Okay. And if I can't take on sort of the dissonance, okay, if I can't take on sort of the conflict and the feelings that go along with that, I'm likely just not to process it. Okay, because I'm not conditioned to process it, and I don't believe a person should be that uncomfortable. Okay, so like it's like a deep belief that that level of discomfort is just not acceptable. So what'll happen is that we have these powers. We have powers of dissociation. We have powers of denial. We have powers of derealization. We have powers of avoidance. And so what'll happen is that psychologically, these parts of myself will become sort of satellite, okay, because I won't integrate them into my main selfhood, okay. So it's almost like I develop almost like these satellite separate aspects that are not integrated into my whole person because I can't believe, or I'm not even conditioned to carry that level of discomfort of having incompatible, conflicting things inside my basic central selfhood. Okay. Now, all that's to say, when I look at Chad Daybell, okay, I get the same feeling as when I look at Rex Heuermann, okay, because they look so damn harmless. Okay. They look so boring. They look so just there's nothing controversial about these people when you interview them or when you see them. They're just boring, kind of mopey, dorky people. Okay. And so it just so happens that, probably the majority of people like that are actually as they appear. Okay. The average person who looks like Chad Daybell or the average person who looks like Rex Heuermann, they probably do live very unhappy lives. Okay. But they take on the unhappiness and they're able to sort of live the marathon of life in that discomfort. Even though it's not pretty, it's probably pretty messy. They probably have good days and bad days. They probably have more bad days than good days. But some people can actually carry all of that discomfort. And so they might even live with the depression or the strain of feeling like I'm not attractive, like I have all these sexual feelings, but I could never be around attractive women. And they probably live almost with that despair, that I'm sort of like an unsatisfied person. And it hurts. I mean, and it's got to cause a lot of strain in someone's life. But I think some people don't tolerate that discomfort, okay? And they don't tolerate all the feelings that go along with who they really are, okay? So a lot of parts of themselves, they can't hold it in the central personhood, okay? So a lot of parts of themselves become satellited and they become sort of like satellite, okay? And I think that can be dangerous, all right? Now, in some cases, dangerous might mean, well, I have this private thing where I like to go to the casino and play a little blackjack and then maybe flirt with people or whatever, but it doesn't go that far. And so there may be a lot of people who have their little private satellites that they cannot integrate into their central personhood. Okay. And so they might have a little private life that maybe their wife doesn't know about, or maybe their children don't know about. But it's just kind of harmless relatively. I mean, it's not really harmless to go to a casino because you can lose a lot of money over the years, and you can start developing a lot of lies to cover up the money you've lost, and there can be a whole. I mean, that can be problematic, and so there's a whole level of like a whole spectrum of how dangerous it can be to not have your whole self integrated. You know what I mean? Or maybe like you might have a really boring guy like Chad, but the wife and the kids don't know he has a massive pornography habit, and he's carefully designed his life so that nobody can tell when he's indulging in his pornography or whatever. Like just imagine all the crazy things. You could lose like hours of your life, like hours and hours just wasting your time in pornography or whatever. But like in the case of Chad Daybell and Rex Heuermann, okay, both ended up committing like not just crimes, but the most serious crimes. I mean, multiple murders. Okay, so that's about as serious as it gets. So basically, I'm just trying to tie what I see as like my theory of narcissism and how we develop in the narcissistic stages. Okay, and then how that can result in really dangerous behavior. All right. So like, and I'm not necessarily saying that Rex Heuermann is a dead center narcissist. Okay, because he may actually be like a complex psychopath, and he may have, I don't know the actual diagnosis, but what I'm saying is I think in both cases, okay, you have a specific problem in the narcissistic stage of development, okay, where there is sort of a commonality of probably a belief, a deep belief of how much a person should carry discomfort and discomfort and just burden, just the burdens and the difficult feelings of life, how much we should actually carry, and how much they've actually been conditioned to actually carry in life. Okay. So I kind of get the feeling when I look at these two people that despite their exterior, like say Rex Heuermann looks like a hardworking guy, but I get the feeling psychologically, he's very, very limited in how much he can tolerate of discomfort. Okay. And probably discomfort. All right. And I kind of get the feeling Chad's the same way. It just kind of comes out in the way you see their behaviors and the way you see their life unfolding. It's sort of revealed that these people, neither of them deep down inside can really carry the strain and the uncomfort and the discomfort of sort of being a dork, sort of being an unsatisfied, unattractive, boring, forgotten, anonymous kind of average person. They really don't tolerate everything that goes along with that, because that would cause a lot of pain, And I think we have to respect people. Like I want to respect anonymous people. I want to respect unattractive people. Okay. I want to respect people that are just kind of, they've gone through their whole life and they've never had any contact with an attractive person. They're not attractive themselves. There's a lot of drama there, and that hurts. Okay. And so I have to respect people who maybe carry the depression, carry the despair, carry the pain, carry the hopelessness, but they carry it, and there's something sort of noble, I guess. And there's something even maybe kind of courageous, or maybe they're not even aware it's courageous, but there's something very respectable about a person who can carry a lot of pain, and just carry it, maybe not gracefully, but at least carry it. But in the case of Chad Daybell and Rex Heuermann, I can sort of see indirectly how neither of these two were able to really carry the strains. Okay, because when put in situations, okay, for example, you might think, well, Chad Daybell, he was a religious guy. He had a nice family. He had all these kids. His wife wasn't particularly attractive. Let's be honest. I mean, she was okay, but his wife Tammy, she was just kind of another average person. She was probably more attractive than he was, but she wasn't maybe his ideal for a woman. So he's got all these kids. He's got a wife that's not especially attractive. He's got a boring life in Idaho. And so you could look at Chad Daybell and you could say, well, gosh, it looks like he went years and years just in the grind, just just tolerating a very boring life. Okay, but it appears evident that deep down inside, he probably didn't really believe a person should have to tolerate that kind of grind. Okay, he probably didn't really believe it, or he probably held out the hope that a person doesn't really have to tolerate that level of despair as a baseline. Okay, somewhere in him was the seed where he thought it was at least possible and maybe hopeful that a person wouldn't have to carry that much despair going through life. Okay, so that's one aspect of narcissism. Okay, and then the second aspect in the narcissistic stage is whether he's really truly conditioned to carry deep discomforts and deep despair, and actually carry it as a physical conditioning. Okay. And I mean, granted, a lot of us probably are limited in these areas, but we see that in key moments, okay, the way he responded, let's say, to meeting a person like Lori Daybell, okay, someone who was very attractive, okay, in those key moments, you could see that he wasn't even able to carry the turmoil, okay, of being around someone so attractive in contrast to his sort of boring and unappealing life. Okay. Let's be honest. I mean, a lot of us would feel stirred up meeting a very attractive woman. Okay. And knowing that our lives are just kind of boring, and a lot of us might even feel all the turmoil. Okay. But the question is, how much can we handle before we break? You see what I mean? And I think that Chad Daybell, he broke fairly easily. You see what I mean? He broke fairly easily. And so, what I'm looking at, probably very similar to Rex Heuermann, is just deep down inside a very limited ability to tolerate all the turmoil that comes with what you really are. In other words, the fact that I might be a very sexual person, even though I live a very boring life. Okay. And can I tolerate the turmoil when I'm aroused in that area? You know what I mean? It's just different people have different limits and different tolerances. And I think when you get into the narcissistic zone, the tolerances are they're notably low. kind of a low tolerance. So let's see if we can see Chad Daybell sort of in the lens of Rex Heuermann, okay? Because it looks to me like Rex Heuermann, he lived a very boring life. He, was likely to have a wife even less attractive than Tammy Daybell. And his life was just kind of uninspiring, just kind of dorky, just a boring, anonymous, unattractive, awkward person, just kind of similar to Chad Daybell. In fact, Rex Heuermann might even have been a little more dorky and awkward than Chad Daybell. Okay. And so you have a guy like Rex Heuermann who, and he also has a lot of interests. Like in his regular personality, he's interested in like the minutia and the trivia of like building codes and architecture. And he's just kind of a dork, But he also has this tremendous seething, this tremendous sexuality, okay? And even a little bit of aggression and who knows, maybe a little resentment, maybe violent tendencies, like a lot of people do, okay? But the thing is that because he can't tolerate all the turmoil and discomfort, he can't actually bring that part of himself to sit inside his central personhood. He just can't bring it in. That part of him, he can't accept it because he doesn't have the tolerance for all the turmoil and all the discomfort of having that incompatible kind of conflicting part of himself. He can't hold that in his central personhood, okay? And so it becomes a satellite through the powers of dissociation, through the powers of denial, through the powers of avoidance. Okay, so Chad Daybell, I think, is if we look at Rex Heuermann that way, and we see how, let's say, he developed this whole side life, this like satellite life of this crazy sexuality of seeing like sex workers, and it was like this completely satellite existence, completely dissociated from his regular life. Okay, well, let's look at Chad Daybell and see if we don't see almost the same thing. Okay, now granted, Chad Daybell was such a Mormon, and he was such a devout and such a faithful Mormon that he never had the opportunity maybe to get into like a sex worker habit where he's seeing prostitutes or whatever. But he did have that sexuality. Who knows how Chad Daybell managed that? Like, I think that's one of the big mysteries. I'd like to know before he met Lori Vallow, sorry. I'd like to know how Chad Daybell dealt with his sexuality, okay, in all those decades before. Okay, I'd love to know that, because apparently he had like a real barnyard, real, kind of like a farmer's sexuality. Like, I don't know. He had a tremendous sexuality, and it's like, I find that really curious, but evidently, as soon as he met Lori, I mean, he was just, it was like a wild animal, basically, like a wild animal, and clearly he couldn't deal with that turmoil. And so Chad has this tremendous sexuality. Okay. And like Rex Heuermann, he also has, I think, some resentments, and I think he's got some violent tendencies. Okay. Surprisingly violent tendencies. And he just doesn't have the capacity to tolerate the turmoil and the discomfort of having all those localized in his central personhood. He can't integrate that. So it becomes a satellite. Okay. So basically you have two men who have this very innocent, very harmless appearance, but they have sort of as a satellite this kind of like raving sexuality. Okay. And also substantial violent tendency, aggression, whatever, like, and even maybe resentments, so those are things that can be very dangerous to have sort of as a satellite and not integrated into the self. Okay. But to be able to integrate those things in the self, it's not possible if you don't, first of all, believe that you should carry turmoils and you should carry discomforts on the inside. Okay. If you don't believe it. And secondly, if you're not even conditioned to carry, because it takes a lot of your energy to carry all that turmoil and just carry it in yourself. There's a lot of people who have violent tendencies. There's a lot of people, like, you just go in the military. There's a lot of very successful people in the military, or just people like construction workers or truck drivers who have a lot of violent potential. They get the hatchet out. They could chop a lot of wood. They could, if they had to, they could fight a war. There's a lot of people that have violent tendencies. There's a lot of people who even have resentments. But some of us can handle, and we can sort of like hold it, and we can take it on, and it can just be in us, and we can actually hold the turmoil. Okay, and we can go through the marathon of life with all that turmoil inside of us, okay, because we're conditioned for it. That's part of being a human being. There's a lot in the environment that weighs on us, and we have to take it on, and we don't let it become a satellite. We own it. It's part of the central personhood. There's a lot in us, okay, but some people are not conditioned to carry all that, okay. And some people have the belief that a person shouldn't have to carry that much, okay. So I think in the case of Chad Daybell and Rex Heuermann, I think you're looking at that dangerous combination where they have the violent tendencies, they have the raving sexuality, okay, they have maybe some resentments, okay, but they can't house it in themselves because they don't have the tolerance, the psychological tolerance to just hold all that, and go through the marathon of life at a state of maybe baseline discomfort of having all these things in your central personhood, okay. And they're just kind of at that extreme where it's going to end up sort of dissociated out as a satellite that's not inside you, okay. And so Chad Daybell has this kind of like satellite that he can't hold inside himself. He can't bring that to light in his family. It's a private thing, but it's also separate from himself. And he can't even have that in himself. When Chad Daybell thinks of himself, that raving sexuality, that's kind of, I don't think it's fully integrated into himself, okay? So when you have something that's not integrated into yourself, it becomes dangerous because you don't have control over it. It's not processed inside of you, okay? And in order to regulate behavior, you have to have the ability, okay? Have to be conditioned, and you have to have the belief that you can carry discomforts, okay? Because if you can't carry discomfort, how are you going to regulate behavior? Part of regulating behavior is tolerating the discomfort, okay? And so because that whole aspect of himself is split off as like a satellite, Chad Daybell did not really have control over his behavior, okay? It's not to say he couldn't have, okay? He could have, but he was more impaired than a person who would have that part of themselves integrated into their central personhood with the belief and the conditioning to carry that discomfort, okay? Chad was not prepared, whether through conditioning or belief, to carry the discomfort and the turmoil of meeting someone as attractive as Lori Vallow, sorry. When he met Lori Vallow, he couldn't handle that turmoil. It was too much for him. And the dominoes started falling, and he started basically just dissolving his integrity, okay, in the service of this very, very powerful force that he could not tolerate. I mean, he couldn't resist it. You know what I mean? It was just too much for him. So, and probably the same thing goes with Rex Heuermann. When he finally got to be around his first prostitutes or whatever, probably just the excitement, just the sexual frenzy. It was just so overwhelming that it overrode any ability to hold these things, and even to consider, even as a personal belief, the value of holding all these things. Okay. So I think, these two cases are very similar. And I think we need to understand, yeah, theoretically, if Chad wanted to go through extraordinary efforts to control his behavior, he could have, but it was just so much. And I think his sexuality was such a satellite and so dissociated from his central personhood. I think when you dissociate parts of yourself into satellites, I don't think you have the level of control as when something's fully integrated into yourself. Okay. So I think that when Chad was sort of smitten by Lori Vallow, sorry, these names. When he met Lori Vallow, I think it was just so powerful, and because that sexuality was so dissociated from his central personhood, I just don't think I think it was maybe too much to ask for him to control, to sort of control his overall. I don't know. I think he lost his integrity. And I think, it was easy for him for the dominoes to start falling, where he started to, because he was so smitten by Lori Vallow. I think then it was just too easy for him to start falling into sort of romancing her, maybe exaggerating his religious abilities or his prophetic abilities, and everything just kind of went out of control from there. So anyway, bottom line is I just encourage people to look at people like Rex Heuermann and just try to see through that same lens people like Chad Daybell, to sort of get a sense of how that phenomenon of not being able to hold discomfort, that can produce satellite aspects of yourself, and those can be very dangerous because it's outside of our basic control. Anyway, thanks for watching.